G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're back with another review of the latest round. And of course, this week we had the last weekend of the preseason matches before the real AFL season begins, as of course opening round will be starting in just a few days time. But let's take a look at the preseason weekend that we just had, just starting on Tuesday, and we did have Collingwood versus Richmond in the first match. Let's get straight into it. And also, if you do enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, as I saw a lot of really good support on the first video reviewing last week's preseason game. So if you guys can leave a like on this one, that would be great as well. Sorry guys, just to jump in, quick jump scare for you. Just before we get into this video, if you guys want to join our AFL Fantasy League and AFL tipping comps, you can see the codes in the top left hand corner right now, and we are giving away a $125 gift voucher to the winners of both the tipping comp and the fantasy comp. And you're also actually giving away a design from our AFL footy print business, which is linked down below if you want to check that out. But let's get back into the video. But we'll start with Collingwood versus Richmond, and Collingwood came out 30-point winners over the Tigers in the end, 10-16, 76 to 5-16, 46. So very inaccurate kicking for both sides. Collingwood did look good. Richmond looked a bit underwhelming after about halfway through the second quarter, couple of good insights for the Tigers though. We did see the likes of Jaden Short off halfback have a pretty good performance with the 27 touches. 23 of those were kicks, so it's good to see. He is a pretty good ball user, so it's good to see him getting a lot of kicks at halfback. Looks like he can definitely be taking that role under Adam Uze. Tim Taranto had about 26 touches. 18 of them were handballs, so we'd like to see him kicking a little bit more, but if you listen to Kane Corns, he can't kick, so maybe we should keep it off his foot. Shea Bolton had an almost day, had the 19 touches, but only 3 behind, so a little bit disappointing on his front. And I will just quickly add about the Richmond players in particular. At the end of the game, if you did see, Mason Cox got into a scuffle, I think was Marlon Pickett in the end. Not a very good look for them, considering Billy Frampton was able to kick that goal from outside 50 that bounced about 15 metres out and bounced straight through, because all of the Richmond players decided to get into a scuffle. And I'm going to be honest, it didn't look the greatest. I think Richmond got to be really careful. I mean, I get you got to be flying your flag for your team, stand up for your teammates, but that looked pretty terrible. If that happened in a real game, that would be incredibly embarrassing. So the Richmond players just have to be ready when the real stuff begins, because if that sort of stuff, flying for the flag for your team is one thing, but conceding a goal like that was pretty embarrassing, even though it was at the end of the game was over. Looking at the Collingwood side, Nick Dacos was massive in the 3 quarters that he did play. Scored 75 fantasy points for the people wondering out there, and was rested in the last, so no injury concerns there. New recruit in Lachie Schultz was really good, looks primed for a really good year, and has a real chance of maybe becoming the best recruit of the year. Jack Ginnivan had a pretty good game, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But yeah, I think he's in for a good year. Finlay Macrae, only played the second half, so a little bit of a wait and see for Collingwood fans if he does play an opening round. Obviously, with the AFL fantasy stuff, opening round doesn't count, so we can wait to see until it actually officially hits round 1, but only scored 28 fantasy points in the second half. And considering he didn't play the whole game, it probably means he's on a bit of the outer for the main 22 going into the first game. Interestingly enough, young key defender called Dean for Collingwood had a massive second half. Didn't play in the first half, I believe, but in the second half actually had a really good performance. He scored 63 fantasy points. Looked like he was really clean with the ball. Took a couple of good marks. I don't think he'll be an opening round. I mean, maybe he will be. I don't know. But definitely keep an eye on him if he does get a position in that round 1 side for Collingwood or opening round, because I think he had a pretty good performance as well. And probably best on ground in the end of this game was probably Paddy Lipinski. Kicked 2 goals, 23 touches. Obviously was the sub in the grand final in 2023. So he definitely looks like a big improver for Collingwood this year. People who are looking at the AFL fantasy scores, we saw Richmond's top 5, Jaden Short 92, Taranto 81, Caden McIntosh 73, Shea Bolton 72, and Liam Baker 71 for Tigers. And for Collingwood, Will Hoskin-Elliott with a 106, along with Paddy Lipinski with the same. Isaac Quaynor with a 95, Maynard with a 93, and then rounding out the top 5 is Jordan De Goey with a 91. But guys, before we get into more of this video, BR Designs, our very own design company, is your one-stop shop for all your AFL prints. We have designs for every single team, from Collingwood to the Giants, so make sure to head down to the description below and find your desired AFL design. And don't worry, as every 6 to 8 weeks, guys, we're going to be releasing brand new and exciting designs for every single team. So make sure to keep an eye on the BR Design social pages, and make sure to use our unique features with our design of scanning the QR code will actually bring up on your phone the highlight that you have the design for. And don't forget at the checkout to use code YouTube for 10% off your purchase for the next 48 hours. So getting quick, guys, let's get back into it. After that, we'll get to Melbourne versus Carlton. Melbourne had a pretty good performance here. Obviously, there's been a lot of concerns over their pretty disastrous off-season off the field. But the 2 preseason games they've played so far, they have won. So on field, they're doing okay. Max Gawn has proven 100% that he needs to be the number 1 ruck, and it was a wasted year really for them last year. Melbourne playing Brodie Grundy at all, in my opinion. Carlton did pretty well up forward. I mean, Harry Mackay and Charlie Curnow both combined for 3 goals each. That is good to see, but considering they kicked 6 of the goals and they only got 10 overall, Carlton, that's always going to be a concern going into this year. Considering there was only 4 other goals kicked from other players, that is a very concerning look for Carlton going forward, and they need to find other avenues to go, whether that be Motlop or Owies or their midfielders really need to get involved as well. Max Gawn is definitely in for a massive year, I believe. I think All-Australian is nowhere near, is definitely in his sights. I think he can definitely have that sort of year. Looking at Melbourne's young players, Caleb Windsor, absolute lock for opening round for Melbourne. Short of an injury, he had a really good performance. He kicked 2 goals as well, so helping Melbourne with their forward structure. So I think he's definitely in for a good start. Injury concern to Jesse Motlop. He did a jarring of the toe, but is expected to be playing in round 1. So that is good for Carlton. Tom Sparrow as well, I want to mention for Melbourne. 3 goals from the midfield. Melbourne's midfielders do need to step up goals-wise. We have seen Christian Petrarca in the past kick goals when he's played forward. Maybe not so much when he's in the midfield. So if Tom Sparrow can chip in with, I'm not saying he has to kick 3 goals a game, but if he can average, 0.8 of a goal a game, 1 every 2 games, to, even if he can average a goal a game of 22 goals, 23 goals in a season, that would be massive for Melbourne. Looking at the AFL Fantasy points here, we got Max Gawn leading all comers for Melbourne with the 130, Tom Sparrow with the 113, Christian Salem with the 103, Neil Bullen with the 87, and Jack Billings with the 81. AFL Fantasy-wise, I think Jack Billings is a little bit of a wait and see, if I'm being honest. He's going to be playing off half forward, which is not a prime role for fantasy, really. So just be concerned on that front. But I do think he could get a go in opening round, and I think he can add something to Melbourne. He definitely won't be getting a spot off the wing with Langdon and Hunter being those 2 primarily. But I do think Billings has a role in the team, and as long as he can stay fit, which has been an issue in his past, he should be all good to go. And then on the Carlton side of things, Harry Mackay got 106. He was the top scorer for AFL Fantasy. Kicked 3 goals, took 10 marks, 1 behind, and I think he shanked had an absolute mare of a kick as well. So for Carlton, not the best. Doesn't look like he's exactly got his kicking boots ready to go for the season, but we will wait and see. Sam Docherty got the 98, George Hewitt with the 94, Blake Acres with the 92, and then Adam Sard rounding out the top 5 with the 87. That's pretty much all I've got to say about that game. Next up, we get to the Giants versus the Gold Coast Suns. Great performance from the Giants. 3 goals, 3 to both Brown and Toby Green. Really good to see. Jack Lukosius did hit the 4 goals straight for Gold Coast, so that is good. But I think it's just a bit of a concern for the Gold Coast Suns. Obviously, this is not the real stuff, so you can't take this 100% to form going into the season. But the Suns just look quite lackluster. I don't know. It was just a pretty disappointing performance, I would say. A lot of people are saying the Gold Coast may not be improving as much as we are expecting under Damien Hardwick. I don't know. It's way too early to tell, obviously. One shining light, though, other than the Jack Lukosius game, was Alex Sexton. Probably wouldn't have seen this coming 6 months ago. I think a lot of people would have been surprised that he was still on the Gold Coast list. But Damien Hardwick has seen something in him in the off-season and has chucked him at half-back. And this game has kind of proven to me that he can have a spot in this half-back line. In the first game, in the match simulations, Alex Sexton had a pretty good performance, but they didn't have Will Powell in the team. This time, the Gold Coast had pretty much their best defence in, and he still had a massive performance. He had 31 touches in the game, 11 marks, which is very good for a halfback. And for the AFL Fantasy watchers out there, he did top score with 115. I think he's priced at 380 odd, so that's just perfect pickings for him. Pick him as like a forward 5th or 6th or even a 4th at this rate because the forward line's so hard to fill up. But he had a really good performance for the Gold Coast. Touk Miller looks like he could get back into that form that he had in 2022, I believe, where he got all Australian. He kicked the goal over 33 touches. He looked all good as well. Matt Rowell was a little bit disappointing, I will say, and Noah Anderson had an okay performance, not exactly blistering. And also Sam Flanders, I'd be a little bit concerned if I'm a fantasy watcher there. If you are a Gold Coast fan, don't exactly be too concerned just yet, but there is a bit of a concern going forward if they start with the Crows in round 1, so that's not an easy game. It is at home for the Suns, but they want to start off very well. I'll just say that. Moving on to the Giants, they were very good. Tom Green absolutely was I think he was best on ground, if I'm being honest. Maybe Toby Green beat him, because he did kick 3 goals. I'll probably give it to Toby Green. He did kick 3 goals. But Tom Green was massive. People have been calling for him as a potential Brownlow favourite. I know it's only pre-season, but the 2 games he has played, he's probably been 1, 2, or 3 of the best players for the Giants. So he's doing nothing wrong in the pre-season. If he can stay fit, he's going to be very hard to beat. Obviously, being at the Giants, he probably won't be seen as much as like the Bonts and the Cripps of all that. But Tom Green is definitely one of the best midfielders in the competition, no matter what you say. He's growing. He had a massive year last year. Had a bit of an injury throughout the middle of the year, I believe, but he's just going to be bigger and better for the preseason that he's had and just going forward. Toby Green, I've mentioned it a bunch of times already. He was probably best on ground for the Giants. Was missed the week before against the Swans, but he's their most important player, and I think that's pretty obvious to say. Kieran Briggs had a pretty good performance, had a pretty poor performance against Brodie Grundy in the match sim, but was a lot better for the run, I believe, and did very well with the 20 touches around the ground, 82 fantasy points for anyone wondering. And the only injury concern to come out of the match was from Brent Daniels. Hopefully he's all good for opening round. I think he got taken off in the 3rd quarter with an injury, so hopefully for the Giants fans out there, he is all good because he is very important to their structure. Obviously, we saw last year with his combination with Bedford at half forward. They were very important for the Giants when they were going into their really good form. So hopefully everything is all good there. On the AFL Fantasy side of things, we've got Tom Green leading all comers for the Giants with the 107, Toby Green with 96, Kieran Briggs with 82, Xavier O'Halloran with the 78, and then Toby Bedford with 76. And for the Gold Coast Suns, we had Alex Sexton, like I mentioned a minute ago, with the 115, Touk Miller with the 109, Will Power with the 96, Jack Lukosius with the 92, and then Noah Anderson with the 88. Rounding out the top 5 there. Now, let's get to the Swans versus the Lions. The Lions did really well after half-time. I think it was a pretty even pegging game, to be honest, probably all the way to about midway through the 2nd quarter. I think the Lions kind of jumped on top of the Swans after that. And then throughout the 3rd and 4th, Sydney weren't as competitive, I don't believe. And plus, I'm sure a lot of people have already seen it now that the game was delayed by half an hour due to bad lights. Sydney, I'm not concerned as a Swan supporter. I mean, you can obviously see in the background, I'm a Swan supporter. I wouldn't be too concerned. Like with any of these preseason games, teams aren't going in 100%. Sydney were resting Brodie Grundy for the majority of the game. They had Peter Ladhams in, and look, he played okay, but I don't think Peter Ladhams is getting a spot in the early rounds. He probably won't get a spot in the team unless Brodie Grundy goes down. So Taylor Adams got injured during the start of the game. It's been confirmed that he will miss opening round and probably will miss the first couple of rounds of the season. Sydney, even though they recruited quite a few experienced midfielders in the off-season to try and help with their young midfielders, most of them are going to be out for the start of the season. Callum Mills, obviously, Luke Parker from the match sim who broke his arm, and now Taylor Adams will be out. So they're going to have to rely on their young mids. I think that another year into them, they're going to be really good. And with a new recruit, James Jordan, this guy has been flying under the radar for the entire preseason, I believe. I don't think a lot of people have talked about him enough. James, I think I mentioned it when we talked about our breakout players for the year. James Jordan could be anything. He had 31 touches in this game, was massive on the other wing, as well as Errol Goulden had a massive game as well. So I think they can become a really good combination for Sydney. And both of Jordan and Goulden can run through the midfield. So if they need some extra speed on the outside, they could probably use a McInerney, or even a Braden Campbell for that left boot. But if they want, James Jordan and Errol Goulden on the wings, I think Sydney have some really good performance out there, and they were very good. So no concerns there whatsoever. Probably other than Goulden and Jordan, though, the Swans were very disappointing, I would say, other than them two. So a little bit of a concern, but I'm not exactly saying, they're out of the 8 now. Let's be honest. Looking at Brisbane, though, they played really well. Hugh McCluggage was best on the ground. I think that's a pretty obvious fact. Kitty Coleman was a massive performance from him. After the final series he had, especially the grand final, which he probably would have won the Norm Smith if they went on and won that game, the Lions. Massive performance from him. He's definitely primed for a good year. Interesting one I want to talk about, though, is Kai Lohmann. Now, last year he was in and out of the team for a few weeks there for the Brisbane Lions. Had a good VFL season. Then kind of was used as a sub for a few games. But he looks like he's going to be having more of a halfback to wing role for Brisbane this year. He racked up the touches for Brisbane. Had 16 touches, 6 tackles as well. Got on the scoreboard, only a point, but, still at the scoreboard a little bit, I guess. And he looks like he could be in for an opening round spot for the Lions. So kind of a watch for me on him. AFL Fantasy-wise, he's definitely a chance. 257 for price, so he's a lock-in for a reserve, especially if he does play an opening round, so I'd keep a close eye on him. Dane Zorko, really good game from him as well. He kicked 2 goals out of 20 touches. I think now that Brisbane have got a really good set midfield, Dane Zorko should just play up forward. I think he brings another really good dynamic to their small forwards. They've got Lincoln McCarthy and Charlie Cameron. He just adds to that, and I think that's a really good addition for Brisbane going into the year. So looking at the AFL before we get into that, I think Brisbane are definitely up there this year. Obviously, not just because of this game, but I think with that experience that they have got in their team, Zorko doesn't have to take a massive role either. Obviously, that's been kind of obvious the last few years. But I think now if they play him just predominantly forward, he can definitely kick. He could have a 30, 40 goal season, Dane Zorko, I believe, anyway. And could just add another string to their bow. And with Duday coming into the team, mid-season, I would say, I think that just helps out their defence, which was a lot stronger last year than what it was in previous years, but I think they can just add a little bit more to that. But let's look at the AFL fantasy points. Leading all comers for Sydney was Errol Goulden with the 133. If it wasn't for the fact that Sydney have that bye, I think it's round 4 or 6. I think it's 4. But if they didn't have that bye, I think he'd be a lock for an AFL fantasy team. But just because of that bye, it's a little bit concerning. But I'd still put him in if you have the cash for him. So 133 from him. James Jordan got the 119, was massive. After that, it drops off quite a bit. Rowbottom got the 75. Nick Blakey with the 74. And then Peter Laddams with the 74 as well. Don't get any sort of drawn into Peter Laddams or even Brodie Grundy for that fact. He didn't play much of this game, especially in the second half. So I wouldn't be too concerned. Anyway, for Brisbane, Hugh McCluggage scored the 131, was massive, like I said, was best on ground. Dane Zorko with the 97, Josh Dunkley with the 96, Kitty Coleman with the 91, and then Cam Rayner with the 83. Kind of an interesting one. He's definitely playing through the midfield. He was in that match sim against the Gold Coast the week before and did it against the Swans. Bit concerning on the fact that he only had 16 touches. I don't think he's an AFL fantasy watch, to be honest with you, but I think for Brisbane fans out there, it's good to see that Cam Rayner is finally getting some midfield minutes. And if he can work on his tank over the next year or two, I think he can be a very good midfielder going forward. And also, I just want to quickly mention that Lincoln McCarthy was very good in front of goal, kicked 3 goals straight. If he can just be a little bit more consistent, I think there's been times last year where he had a couple of games in a row he wouldn't kick a goal. If he can just get to that 1.5 goals a game as a small forward, I think that just helps out the Lions a ton. So hopefully he can continue and improve on what the Lions forward line, how dynamic it is already. So hopefully he can improve. And 3 goals in a match, in a preseason game, works well going into the season. After that, we get to Geelong versus the Bombers. The Bombers actually had a pretty good performance here and then just dropped off late where the Cats ran over the top of them. It's better performance from Essendon. I know a lot of people were jumping on the bandwagon of saying, Essendon are going to be bad this season because they lost to St Kilda at a match sim by 66 points. I wasn't doing that. I knew it was a match sim and they had a better performance here. Again, it's only a pre-season game, so you can't take a lot into it. Peter Wright did play his first game, but only played a half. So that's, that's another thing that they'll be getting into round 1. He'll be playing a full game, you would hope, and it just adds to their goal-kicking prowess, I guess. But Essendon dropped off pretty considerably in this game, and Geelong just overran them. I don't know if... I don't want to say it's a fitness thing, because I don't want to just speculate something like that, but the drop-off in this game from the Bombers was pretty considerable, I will say. But anyway, nonetheless, Nick Martin, he was really good. A lot of people are saying that his halfback role may not come. He may still have that wing role to midfield. But no matter what, if he can play like this, 28 touches, 11 marks, 2 goals, this guy is going to be an All-Australian, option going into the end of the year if he can average around this sort of mark. I'm not saying goals-wise, but getting a lot of touches around the ground, having some mark to kicks, that's very good to see. He's a good ball user for Essendon, so I think that's definitely needs to get the ball into his hands a bit more. And they can't just rely on Parrish and Merritt. They need some other people to go with them. So I think that he's in for a big year, Nick Martin. Parrish did well, and Merritt did well. Will Setterfield had 25 touches, good clearance player. Had a really good start to 2023, Will Setterfield, but kind of petered off as the season gone on. I think he had an injury as well. It was a good performance from him. Xavier Dersma had a good performance for Essendon. 23 touches off that wing, obviously the new recruit for them. I do want to quickly mention highest goal scorer for Essendon and Kyle Langford. I love his game. I thought he was a little bit unlucky to not get an All-Australian spot last year. Obviously, they had to pick one hybrid forward, and it was Toby Green always. And I agree that Toby Green was the better player. But 50 goals last year from Langford. If they can get the combination of him, Wright, and Harry Jones, who's back now, if they can get on a bit of a run and kick, 100 plus goals this year, they can make finals and could have a really good year, the Bombers. So hopefully that is the case for Bombers fans out there. Honestly, is one of the most underrated players in the comp, and I don't think Kyle Langford gets talked about around enough, in my opinion. I think they could use 2 or 3 of him because he's good down back, he's a good midfielder, and he's a very good forward. So, and he played a bit of ruck a couple of years ago too, so he's the all-rounder. Let's talk about the Cats though, because they were the winners in the end, and Max Holmes was probably their best player until he got taken off with injury in the last quarter. He played the first 3 quarters, he was managed in the final quarter, so they're saying there is no injury concern going into round 1. Obviously, Geelong will have that extra break. They don't play an opening round, so that is good for Max Holmes. Hopefully, everything's all good on his front, because I think he's in for a massive year for the Cats. Tyson Stengel kicked the 3 goals. Good performance from him. He needs to play a lot better than what he did last year. He was kind of off after the great year he had in the premiership year where he was All-Australian as well. So I think he can improve. I think he'll be fine. And, 3 goals in a match sim, not the best thing in the world, but I think he can definitely build on that and bring into a good season. Jeremy Cameron didn't hit the goal scorers, kicked 3 behind, so I don't think he had much issues in front of goal last year. Obviously, very early on in the season, people were saying he was a chance for 100, which died off pretty quickly, but, he's building, and I think Geelong can have a good year as long as they keep their players on the field. Obviously, Guthrie, early minutes in the match sim, was injured early, so that was very disappointing, but yeah, hopefully they can build that. A couple of midfielders, young midfielders go through. Jai Clark, Tanner Bruin were very good. Dempsey had a good game. So hopefully they can get their young midfielders going through. It looks like Dangerfield will be playing a little bit more forward this year. So I think the Geelong Cats, they can build on their young midfielders going through there and then have their older guys like Duncan, Guthrie, even when he comes back, Dangerfield. If they can play like different roles, like off half-back or half-forward, I think they'll just add for their young midfielders. So yeah, and Jack Bowes as well had a pretty good performance with his midfield minutes. And also the injury concern for Essendon's side was Jordan Ridley. He did sustain an injury. It was a quad injury, I believe, which he actually injured in the preseason. And I think he returned from that a couple of weeks ago to be ready for this game, and then has it re-injured it. So it's likely going to be another 2 to 3 week injury. So he will likely miss the first round or 2. So that's very disappointing for Essendon because he's obviously a very important player. Let's move on. We'll talk about the Port Adelaide Freo game. Port Adelaide had a pretty good performance here. I'm going to say, though, out of the teams I've watched so far, Freo were one of the worst. I'm going to be honest. They look lackluster. It was very easy for Port to go and win this game. I won't say they were the worst performing team. They weren't one of the worst performing teams, but they're one of the teams that were the worst performing out of teams that I expect a lot more from. Like West Coast, I think, played worse, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Obviously, North Melbourne played today. I'm recording this a little bit early. I will do the review of the North Melbourne at St Kilda game in this video, but it's just before this game is going to end. So we'll see how we go. But they did have a good match sim, the North Melbourne. Freo, on the other hand, this was not a good performance from them. Despite Hayden Young, this was pretty disappointing. Let's talk about Port Adelaide first, though. Ryan Burton had a good game, 30 touches, 13 marks, 25 kicks as well. Obviously, the trade talked about him and Chad Wingard, 5 years ago now, always been talked about. Ryan Burton probably hasn't been used as a rebound defender as much as he probably wants to. He's definitely been used as like a lockdown defender for a lot of his time there. But now I think he can definitely open up and become something more now that they've got the likes of Radicali and Brendan Zerk-Thatcher. He can play a little bit off of his opponent. So I think it's really good to see. Dan Houston had a good performance as well with 26 touches, 8 marks, and he had 4 tackles as well. Connor Rozee, he's a star. I think he's definitely up there. He could definitely be up for a Brownlow this year. He definitely had a good finish he had definitely a good all-round year for Port Adelaide. I think he's a great captain's choice. And yeah, added to the scoreboard as well with a goal. Ollie Wines looked pretty good as well. 27 touches. He needs to get back to that Brownlow form that he had a few years ago though. If Port Adelaide are to challenge this year, he needs to have a good year. Travis Boak had a pretty good performance with 23 touches as well. We want to talk about Jackson Mead. I want to really take a look at. I think he's absolutely a lock for the early rounds of Port Adelaide. He's had 2 really good preseason games, which I've watched all the way through. Was one of the best against Adelaide, especially in the first 4 quarters, and was very good against Freo. Had the 21 touches, the 8 marks, and the 5 tackles, along with 10 scorer involvements, which is really good to see. I think he's absolutely cemented a spot in the round 1 team for Port Adelaide. And for people who are watching AFL Fantasy or playing it this year, priced at only $3.93, so not too expensive for like a rookie player. He's a forward mid, so I think he's definitely up there as a choice around a 4th forward, if not like a 7th or 8th midfielder, if you want to put him there. Because I know a lot of rookies are going for forward spots, so maybe you want to put him in the midfield. That's just my thoughts on that. Let's talk a little bit about Freo. We'll talk about Freo in a second. The main injury concern from this game, though, was Zach Butters. He did roll his ankle in the first half and was taken off as a precaution. Port Adelaide aren't too concerned, and he should be fine for round 1. But they were saying that about Taylor Adams throughout the call in the Swans game, and he was told that he's going to miss 2 or 3 weeks. So just to wait and see on Zach Butters. Hopefully for Port Adelaide fans, he is all good. But a rolled ankle doesn't seem too concerning. So I'm not too concerned. I wouldn't be too concerned if you're a Port Adelaide fan just yet. Let's talk about Freo. Like I said, Hayden Young was basically their best player on the ground, and it wasn't really that close. He had the 26 touches, 7 tackles, and hit the scoreboard as well. Kicked 2 goal 3. Could have had a massive night if he kicked straight. 2 goal 3, not the best. 69% disposal efficiency, which is pretty good for a midfielder. I think it's really good to see for Freo fans that they're trying to get another player through their midfield. They've obviously got really good young mids in Sarong and Brayshaw. Nat Fyfe's obviously been going through there throughout the preseason. We'll talk about him in a second, but I think Hayden Young is not. I'm not going to say as good as like 100% like a Jordan Dawson, which we saw last year. But the fact that he's a very good left foot kick like Jordan Dawson, I think he can definitely add to that midfield group. If he gets that disposal from a Brayshaw or a Sarong in the deep midfield battles, like he can get that first use ball, that use to go forward. I think that's definitely good for their key forwards like Tabernar and their smalls who are trying to get it on the ground. I think Hayden Young's really good to use, and I think he can definitely be lethal for the Dockers. Looking at Nat Fyfe, had a pretty good performance. He had 26 disposals, 18 of those were handballs, so big concerning for AFL Fantasy, but and ended up on 58 in the game, so not the greatest, but on a Freo point of view, I think I've always been on the side that he should probably be playing forward, in my opinion now. But, he is a dual Brownlow medalist. If he wants to play midfield, if Freo think he can play midfield, that's his prime position. You put him in the midfield. That's just an obvious fact in the end, I believe. But yeah, I overall Fremantle, kind of disappointing in their game. Again, it's only a preseason, so you can't be too concerned. But they just look so lackluster. They were kind of on my level with the Gold Coast. They just didn't look like they wanted to be there for a lot of the game. And maybe that's just a fact of they just want to get into their season. They don't want to be bothering with these games. So I don't know. Maybe that's a sight to look at for Freo. Hopefully they do improve on their first game. Hopefully their players as well, like Sean Darcy, Taberner and Fyfe, can get through the early rounds of the season. Because obviously they were not decimated by injury, but their experienced key players were just injured last year, like Darcy, like Fyfe, and like Taberner. They seem to be all back. Darcy did play a half of this game, so he should be all good for round 1 against the Lions. And I think a main point of Fremantle, which can help them this year go up the ladder a bit, is they have to win at home. They had a pretty, I think, half and half year at home last year, and they're just not that good away. So if they can bank 3/4 of their wins at home and then just bank a couple of wins away, they could very well push towards the top 8 spot this year. But I just don't trust that they're going to be able to. That's just my thoughts anyway. Let's move on though. We'll talk about the Adelaide Crows West Coast game. So, like I said, West Coast were pretty disappointing. I'm kind of tired of hearing, oh, West Coast performed pretty well, they're looking okay. They lost by 67 points. That's not a good performance. Let's just put that out there. Good on you. Like, you didn't lose by 100. It's only a preseason game, but let's not sit there and act like this isn't not a very good game. This is not a very good look for the West Coast Eagles. I'm going to be honest. We've got to be putting them on a standard. This is why I think North Melbourne have been down the bottom for so freaking long, is because people sit there and go, oh, they're improving. Yeah, well, they're still finishing 17th on the ladder. They're not improving that much, are they? Now, I don't think West Coast are in that boat yet, because this is the first time they've been down the bottom for a few years. They've been down there for a few years, but what I'm saying is they haven't been down there for the length that North Melbourne have. So, okay. But look, let's look on the positive side, because that's what we're all about here on this channel. Tim Kelly had a massive performance. I believe he won the BNF last year. I didn't really look into it. But he was definitely the best player last year, let's be honest. And he's definitely played this first game. Well, yeah, he's their first, televised game for most people as a good performance. Had the 26 touches, kicked the goal. He's definitely going to be helping the likes of Harley Reid, which we'll talk about in a second, moving their young midfield forward. I think he had a good performance. Elliot Yeo had a good performance as well. Only had the 16 touches, but the 9 tackles for him. He's always a good tackler. He's always going to be that tough ball in the midfield. I think they lost a lot of their grunt in the midfield last year without Elliot Yeo. He looks fit. He looks firing. Absolute needs to be a starting midfielder for the whole year for West Coast. And if they can keep their players on the field, which has obviously been a big issue for West Coast over the past few years, I think West Coast can have a decent year. I think in my latter predictions, I didn't have them doing very much, but honestly, that's honestly because I don't know if they can keep their players on the field. They just struggled to for the last 3 or 4 years now. But I do think if West Coast can keep their main core experienced players on the field, I think they can have a good year. Well, good enough year that they don't finish bottom. Let's just put it there. But let's talk about the infamous Harley Reid. He looked good in this game. Obviously, people were kind of clowning on him for his match sim game where he only had 6 or 7 touches and, AFL Fantasy wise, he only scored 30. So that means he's fucking trash and the hype is way too much for him, which I'll agree is a bit high. But look, the guy had a match sim and had a poor game, which as a young player, players are going to have, obviously. But he had a good game here. He had the 20 touches. I think it was second highest. Yeah, I think he had the second highest amount of disposals in the game. Was targeted quite a lot by the Crows players, trying to put some, a lot of pressure onto him, pushing him around a bit, which, as a young player, you're gonna have to cop. I know Jack Watts didn't really deal with it early in his career, so Harley Reid's just gonna have to deal with it. And he seemed to hold up pretty well. Still didn't hit the scoreboard, but if he, I think he's going to get a lot of midfield time this year for West Coast, and I think that's really good to just chuck a young midfielder in there. They've got a good couple of young mids like Elijah Hewitt as well. So I think Ruben Jimmy, West Coast can chuck those young guys in there as long as they're experienced with Yeo and Kelly. I think they can do something. But look, at the end of the day, they did not look that good. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it for you. They didn't look the best, and Jack Darling just can't run that forward line whatsoever. Now, obviously, Oscar Allen will be back this week, in round 1, so that is good to see for West Coast, but they looked in need of Oscar Allen, and if he goes down, they will struggle to win any sort of game this year, because when they kicked it forward, Darling gave them nothing, and they had nothing else to do. They had no one else to kick to, so Oscar Allen, new co-captain, so, the responsibility is on you to help your club. You're going to have to be carrying the entire West Coast Eagles to get them a win this year, because the young midfielders and the young guys can help, but their forward line, I don't know we'll see how Tyler Brockman goes to help them out as a small forward. And, Noah Long has a chance, and I'm forgetting one, sorry. Jake Waterman could have a good year, but their main focal point of Oscar Allen needs help, and I don't know if Jack Darling can help them with that. So we'll see how they go. Maybe they'll go in deep for Logan McDonald this year, who the hell knows. At the end of the year. Let's talk about the Crows, though. They did what they should have done and just beat the Eagles up, and they did that well. Isaac Rankin, he's in for a big year. All-Australian is a chance for him. If he can he had a good 2 preseason games so far. Had a good year last year. Probably had some opportunities to have bags of goal games, but he just didn't capitalise on the scoreboard. Kicked quite a few points. Kicked 4 goal 1 in this game in 3 quarters of footy. Had the 18 touches, 7 marks and 3 tackles. He played through the midfield at times in this game. I I mean, I do like the idea. I think they did this back in 2017 when they had that really good run, obviously going into the grand final with Charlie Cameron when he was there. They liked playing these bursting midfielders, like bursting small forwards as like midfielders to get some extra speed through there. I think that's a good idea. I do think that Isaac Rankin needs to still be playing predominantly forward line though, because he's just so dangerous around the goals. So 4 goals for him. He had a really good performance. Jordan Dawson, pretty good performance as well, 29 touches. I don't think he played much of the last quarter. So for anyone who's watching and looking for AFL Fantasy, CD 89 or 88 and a bit disappointed by that, I wouldn't be watching this game. He is going to be 100 plus most games this year. Sam Berry was a very big surprise for me. Came onto the scene in 2022, then was kind of petered off last year, didn't really see him much. I think he only played 6 games. In this game, though, had to kick 2 goals, 22 touches, 7 tackles, 108 fantasy. But he was very good. He looks like the strong-bodied midfielder that they kind of need, because they're too reliant on Laird and Dawson anyway. I think Berry definitely adds to that, and Crouch, I think, can do that as well. The main player I want to talk about, though, which I think him and Rankin were the BOGs on the ground, was Riley O'Brien. Probably not a ruckman that we talk about enough anymore. He was the winning hit-out player for the whole year last year, had the most hit-outs. He had 22 touches, got around the ground, which is something that he hasn't been able to do the past few years, I feel like. I feel like he's had a couple of down years, Riley O'Brien. He did win the 2020 BNF for the Crows, but really hasn't been seen as like a really good ruckman since, and I think that he's fit. I think he's looking healthy. He looks like the ruckman that the Crows need to build. And he had a really good performance in this game. And I really hope for the Crows fans out there that he has a good year. Because if he's a really good... When he's playing well, he's getting up and down the ground really easy. He's taking marks in defence. He's getting forward and helping out his team. He's taking good marks on the wings as well. I think he's just kind of lacked that in the past few years. So if he can have a good year for the Crows, like he had in this match preseason game, he's going to have a big year for the Crows. Oh, sorry, one more thing. Only injury concern in this game was from Riley Thilthorpe. He did hurt his knee in the 4th quarter and was managed for the remainder of the game. Rankin, in an interview after the game, said he should be fine, so it's just a wait and see on Riley Thilthorpe. Hopefully everything's all good. I think I said Thilthorpe a few seconds ago. Hopefully I didn't say O'Brien. Thilthorpe was the one who got injured. Let's move to Hawthorn versus the Bulldogs. So, Hawthorn had a pretty good start to this game. Half-time they were in front. But the Bulldog goal kicking was absolutely atrocious in the first half. They kicked 2 goal 12 to halftime. Now, in the 3rd quarter, they kicked 8 goal 2, which saw the Dogs kind of get clear, and then they were able to run away with it in the end. Bontempelli, I mean, people are saying that like he's the Brownlow favourite, and he absolutely, I think, is. He had 32 touches in this game, 19 number kicks. He's a very good ball user, as we already know. 8 tackles, 1 goal 2. I've got him in AFL Fantasy. Could you just kick straight, mate? But anyway, obviously it doesn't matter at this point. He's definitely up there with the Brownlow favourites. I think that he's going to have a massive year. I think that he does need help, though. I think that they need some midfielders to go with him, because I think Liberatore went with him last year, but so many midfielders just let them down. I think that Treloar had a pretty down year. McRae obviously did. They kept on chucking him forward, which was half forward, which was so weird. They kept on chucking like Caleb Daniel in there for a few weeks. They never had a settled midfield. So I think they settled their midfield, and I think they can have a massive year. Bontempelli needs the help. On the forward line front, though, which I think Western Bulldogs kind of get called out for every now and then because they have such a good lineup of forwards, but they just don't combine well. In this game, they did. Ugle-Hagan and Norton combined for 8 goals. They kicked 4 goals each, 4 goals 2 each, actually. So that's a really good performance from them. They kicked 8 goals, and in the end, that's what they need. I mean, I'm not saying they need to average 8 goals a game between them to get the Bulldogs into finals, but if they can kick an average of 6 to 8 goals a game, the Bulldogs will be making finals, and they'll have no concerns. And we've seen when the Bulldogs make finals, they are hard to beat. So if those two can combine for some really good games this year, and they need to both do it, they can't just be one of them, because that's what's been the issue for the Bulldogs for so long. The Bulldogs have had to rely on either Norton or Ugle-Hagan to get on the board. And you can't rely on Rory Lobb. We've seen that last year. In fact, I'm very surprised that Sam Darcy didn't play in this game. He was on the bench, but I don't think he played a minute of the game. And also, I want to mention Riley West for the Bulldogs. He kicked 3 goals straight. And last year, he played a little bit of half forward for the Bulldogs and had a pretty good year. And I think he can have a good year for them as well. I think he just adds another dynamic to their forward line, because we've obviously got the small crumbing forward in Waitman, but Riley West kind of gives them something different. He's more of a hybrid forward that not obviously as the caliber of Green or Langford, but I think he could be a good forward like that. I think he can kick a 30-40 goal season for the Bulldogs, and I don't think he's good enough to be in their best midfield, which I think a lot of people have been waiting for. Not yet, I believe. I don't think he's in there, but I think that he can definitely build on and kick some goals to the Bulldogs, which they desperately need. And the last player I want to talk about on the Bulldogs side is Riley Sanders. Absolute lock for round one. Had 30 touches in this game, 10 score involvements. He's a player for the now, but obviously he's more for the future. But this guy, despite the long socks, the pulled up sock, I don't know about that option, mate. But anyway, I think he's definitely in for a massive year, Riley Sanders. And if you're not already, which I don't know why you wouldn't be, he's an absolute lock for your AFL fantasy team. He's only 285, obviously being a draftee. So absolutely lock him in if you're an AFL fantasy. And the Bulldogs fans, get excited because he's definitely a massive player going forward. On the Hawthorn side, dropped off after halftime. Not the best looking performance from them. Hopefully they're going to be performing very well going into the year. They've obviously been quite decimated through injuries, especially in their back half. So hopefully everything's all good there. Jai Newcomb was probably their best player. I think that's pretty obvious. He had 37 touches. Just didn't have a lot of help around him, if I'm being honest. Warple didn't have a very good game. Will Day is obviously out through injury, so their young midfielders just have to lift a little bit. McDonald had a pretty good game. Mackenzie had a pretty good first half, I believe. So they just need some more people going with Newcomb at this stage. Carl Amon looks like he's playing a new role of half-back and had a pretty good performance. He had 28 touches, 24 of those were kicks. And I think from people who probably saw him in his Port Adelaide days, he's a very good field kick. So if they can use him off half-back and, give the option of playing the younger guys in their wings to midfield, I think he's definitely going to be one of their best players going in throughout the year for Hawthorn. I think he's just a very good ball user, and if he can average 25 to 28 a game, and if he can kick 20 times a game, he's going to get his team on the scoreboard because he's just so good when he's going inside forward 50 or getting outside of defence. And if you are looking at the moment, he's only a midfielder, I believe, in AFL Fantasy, so don't get him just yet. But by round 6, you'd think he'd have a defensive status, and that's an absolute lock for me. Maybe Chol only kicked the one goal, and that's his only goal that he's got of any of the practice matches so far, so they do need to have a little bit more impact from him up forward. Mitch Lewis had a pretty good performance. He kicked 2 goals, but Jack Ginnivan played quite well. Obviously, the new recruit at Hawthorn. He kicked 2 goals too. Would like to kick him 4 goals if you're a Hawthorn fan, but had a pretty good game in the end. Looks like he's definitely building as that small forward and will definitely take over a lot more when Luke Bruce does retire, but they do have a pretty good looking forward line, the Hawks, and if it wasn't for the fact that their defensive attributes like Blank and another defender which escapes me at this point, they could have a really good team to build upon in the next couple of years, especially this year as well. I think they were a team that was expected, by me at least, that we're going to skyrocket this year. I just don't know if they will be able to at this point now. It's just going to be a bit difficult with a lot of injuries at the start of the season. Don't get me wrong, I think they can. But it's just going to be a bit difficult if they concede too much, because I think their forward line can kick a winning score, but their defence is just going to be lacking at some points. But finally, guys, let's talk about the St Kilda North Melbourne game. So now that the game's complete, guys, let's talk about the Saints-North Melbourne game. The Saints ran out winners by 19 points. It was a good win in the end, even though the Saints had a pretty good lead going into halftime. North Melbourne did catch back in the third quarter, had a 5-goal quarter in the third with the wind, and then took the lead early in the fourth quarter. But the Saints were able to claw their way back in front and win the game. Good performances from Max King, kicked 2 goals early. He was a bit quiet after that. Sharman took a really good mark late in the game, which got them in front. Nick Larkey honestly could be anything this season. Coleman medal is definitely within his grasp. If North Melbourne can win a few games, he's definitely up there. Kicked 3 goals in the end and was instrumental in their comeback. Zane Dersma was a really good performance from him up forward and took a couple of really good classy marks. Let's talk about recruiting Zach Fisher as well. This guy is going to be big this season off of halfback for the Roos. Had 36 touches in this game, 6 marks. Harry Sheezer was massive again, had 32 touches. I think he's almost a lock at this point. It does look like that Jack Sinclair will be out for the start of the season, so he's 50k less. Harry Sheezel, that's where I'm looking towards. He looks like he's in for a massive year. Owens for St Kilda had a pretty good game. He had a very good first half, kind of died off in the rest of the game. Ended up with 19 touches, 5 tackles, 7 marks, 2 goals, 1. Looking at a couple of newer players, Ari Schoenmaker. So this guy has been talked about as a really good left foot kick. He does look like he'll play a little bit of a key defensive role for St Kilda. He had 16 touches in the end, 14 of those were kicks and 11 marks. He scored, for anyone wondering AFL Fantasy wise, he had 83 points. This guy is 200k in AFL Fantasy, so basement price. If he is in the round 1 team for the Saints, lock him in, because I'm not saying he's going to average 80 by any means, but even if he can get 60, that would be massive for someone who's 200k. Charlie Lazaro scored 80. Looks like he's going to get some midfield minutes this season. He had 21 touches, 13 of those were handballs, but still was able to get 5 tackles as well. He's in for a pretty big year, I think, Charlie Lazaro. McKercher only had the 17 touches in this game, but I still think he's in for a massive year. He obviously had a very good first game in the match simulation against Collingwood, but he's all good to go in my opinion. Davies Uniacke, I wouldn't be too worried about for anyone who wants to get him. He didn't play much midfield at all, especially in the second half, hardly went in there. So just be aware of that. Now let's talk about the injuries. So Jai Simpkin in this game got a concussion from a pretty severe head knock caused by Jimmy Webster. He jumped up Webster. You guys will see the replay. If you don't know, just look at, if you just go on the AFL app right now, when this goes up, probably about an hour from when I've recorded it. So just go check it out. He's going to get 4 to 6 weeks, maybe even 8. That was terrible from Jimmy Webster. Absolute brain fade. And yeah, Simpkin, luckily he's got a little bit of time to get him ready for round 1, but that was really disappointing. And late in the game, Dougal Howard looks like he's pulled a hamstring, which he had a lot of issues with in 2023. Really disappointing for St Kilda. That may give an opportunity for Schoenmaker to make his debut in round 1. But Dougal Howard, I think, is a very important player for the Saints. And yeah, I think he's pretty much out at least for the next 3 weeks, I would say. But yeah, guys, that's basically the review of the second week of the preseason games. So hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to check out the podcast, which will be coming out on Wednesdays now with the season beginning. And of course, with opening round beginning on Thursday night between Sydney and Melbourne, the content will be rolling out here on the Bounty Riders YouTube channel. So make sure to stick around, subscribe, and that's all from me. So we'll catch you all later.